So when we were planning this, we had a bit of an email introduction to this discussion from the organisers last week, and I think it was Todd. I think you said, "So who's a David and who's a Goliath?" And I replied, "You're all Goliaths to me." But I think it may be interesting to maybe go to each and see if you describe yourselves as a David or a Goliath, a big company or a little company. So yeah, Todd, if we start with you, maybe tell us a bit about Okta and whether you're a David or a Goliath.
Yeah, well, it really depends on who I'm standing next to. If it's a big, tall guy, I'm a David. If it's a short guy, I'm a Goliath. No, at Okta, we just really focus on trying to make customers successful. And it's funny, when you start a company, I started Okta about 5 years ago. When you first start, you're very obsessed with competition. Who's doing what? Who's in your space? Who's not in your space? You realize after a couple of years that you kind of, it's out of your control. And you just should control what you can control is making your customers successful and building your product. And the whole being paranoid about the competition drops down, and you kind of just come into your own with your product and making your customers successful.
Okay, and JP, I'd think of Salesforce as a Goliath. If someone was going to say, out of the companies on this stage, who's a Goliath? I'd go for Salesforce first, I'd have thought, but maybe not.
Well, I'm much more used to being called the David rather than the Goliath. But I think we're actually entered a time when being a Goliath, or even the use of the word versus, is a lot harder to sustain in the marketplace than used to be the case. Cooperation, having ways of being able to work with people, openness, in order, going back to what Todd was saying, to be focused on the customer. The old models of saying you had to be fully integrated monolithic architectures are less sustainable. Ecosystems are more common, partnerships are more common, openness is more common. So it's not just the Goliath that's sort of being threatened, but I even think the versus is under pressure, because any sort of versus means whoever wins, the customer loses.
Okay.
I think I definitely qualify as the David against these two guys. But it's interesting, thinking about this before
Exactly, he's first honest one up here.
Thinking about this before we came on, I think every entrepreneur who's starting a business, they start it as a David, and they have ambitions to be a Goliath. But I think what Todd was saying around market is quite interesting. It's, to a certain extent, the size of the company, whether you're a David or a Goliath, is kind of constrained by the market size. So if you're the dominant player in the security market, then you're a David, you're a Goliath, no matter what the size. But I think it's interesting as well, as software changes the way we measure these things, and even in the technology industry, this is changing. If you look at a company like Intel, they have a market cap of about 120 billion. They have 100,000 employees. Facebook, 150 billion market cap, 7,000 employees. I mean, which one is who's bigger out of those two? That's an open question.
Interesting, yeah. I mean, JP, what is a Goliath in this new in this new landscape?
Well, for me, when I look at sort of platform-based businesses, when I joined Salesforce, we didn't even have 3,000 employees. We have 14, 15,000. I haven't looked at the exact numbers, but we have 1.8 million developers. So where is the leverage in that? Where is the power in that? When it's the customer community, the developer community that has the power, then you become cooperative, because that's the way to get to it. But I think the point Todd was making earlier, maybe you want to elaborate on it. Even if you look at market cap, if you look at the size of the market itself in terms of revenue, right? We all become Davids when you look at the traditional markets. But if you look at speed, if you look at growth, then maybe we're all Goliaths, because if the measure becomes rate of growth, that's quite different from saying, what's your incumbent sort of position? So context matters as to, and I think that's part of what you were trying to drive at. Depending on what lens you're looking at, every one of us can be characterized as a David or a Goliath, but the characterization is less sustainable than used to be the case in the past.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, speaking about platforms, it's pretty interesting. If you look at the world, everyone that's working on an enterprise company wants to create a platform. And I think the framework, the mindset when people say that is really steeped in what Microsoft did 20 years ago, where they made a platform around the desktop and really a monopoly around the desktop, which was, they found out that that was illegal, but they dominated the whole industry. And I think everyone to a certain extent is trying to build that kind of platform, and it's not clear that that's going to work anymore. You saw Facebook tried to make a platform 5 to 7 years ago, and they kind of did a little bit and didn't really stick with it. But I think that there is something in a platform, but it's not clear what the new platform looks like. It's not clear what that new Goliath and that new platform is going to look like. And I think there's a lot of room for innovation and innovative companies to try to stake out that landscape and innovate there.
Yeah, and you mentioned Microsoft there, the Goliaths of the era before the present one. Is it possible for them to stay in that position? We've obviously seen Microsoft turning itself around in terms of massive layoffs and reorganization over the last year. Can it maintain its position?
Yeah, so one thing that JP was mentioning earlier, but if you look at the enterprise marketplace for software, it's about a $300 billion a year global market. If you add up all the revenue of the cloud companies, the Salesforce.coms, the Workdays, the ServiceNows, it comes to about 18 billion. So cloud gets a lot of talk, especially at venues like these, but it's still small potatoes. And in that sense of the word, in that sense of the concept, we're all Davids. And for us to be successful, we have to get more of the world to see things our way and take some of that spend, the spend that's still going into billions and billions into the old model of legacy on-premise software and turn it over to the cloud.
I think one of the other things that's happening is that historical attempts at moving into this space, whatever you wanted to call the platform then, were built on monolithic architectures. And those architectures stood the test of time for reducing unit costs as volumes grew up. But when you looked at the cost of change, over time, they became onerous. And today's platforms need to manage the cost of change as effectively as just unit cost. And that means that the monolithic model, the integrated suite or whatever you want to call it, to say it's not just one size fits all, but you have no choice but to buy everything from me, whereas customer choice is meditating towards saying, let me work within an environment where I can choose some of you and some of you and some of you, and you've got to make it easy for me to integrate. So the API type model, the idea that people can, on the one hand, extract data out of you safely and securely because you have the API structure, but balanced also with a publisher structure when they can drop things into you safely and securely, starts creating almost what I visualize as a semi-permeable membrane, okay? Because both sides matter. And where we're heading towards is that kind of understanding of saying it's not a single play, winner takes all monolith. It's much more what are your protocols for collaboration and cooperation across a much wider landscape. And the ecosystem model that I feel is emerging is driving towards that lack of proprietary lock-in and much more freedom on behalf of the customer to be able to choose the palette they want. So once you become customer-centric, you sort of drive towards that, keep the cost of change low.
Right, yeah, and talking about this new world where maybe it's more about kind of collaboration and how services can complement each other. Does that kind of affect valuations in companies, or should it perhaps? Because a lot of the venture capital industry is all around kind of creating these Goliath companies that are going to dominate industries. Andrew, what's your perspective there? Should your investors be worried?
What's the question?
Should your investors be concerned that you maybe can't become the Goliath, if JP's theory holds true, that the companies of the past, the 70s and 80s became the big Goliaths? If there aren't going to be those Goliaths Is that necessarily a problem for the future of the economics behind all of this?
I think platforms had a place in the past, and platforms also have a place in the future. Building a platform, establishing a platform is a great way to become a Goliath, but evolving that as well. And what we call a platform today, like the Salesforce platform, or the platform that we're building at Importio, means something different to what it means to talk about Windows as a platform. You know, Windows you installed on an individual machine, it gave you a platform for building on top of. Now, platform, the word platform is, it's got a much tighter integration with cloud and cloud distribution. So you look at the iOS App Store and et cetera. So I think platforms are going away. People are going to continue to try and build platforms because it's a great way of building large companies. People are also going to continue to use platforms because there are economies of scale, distribution, access to customers that come with building on top of a platform rather than trying to own everything. So it sounded a boring answer. I kind of think that the fundamentals around platform and developers are going to remain the same, and kind of structurally, but I think the properties and characteristics will change. Cloud is where it's at now. In the future, you know, mobile's a big thing. That'll continue to be the same.
Yeah, I think as usual in life and in the world, the venture capitalists are going to be fine. And I think the why is for a couple of reasons. One, first of all, venture capitalists can have tremendous returns even if their companies don't become Microsoft. I mean, Microsoft, Facebook, Google, these are once-in-a-generation companies. There's lots of successful venture capitalists that never invested in them. That's one thing. The second thing is that if you just look at the numbers, as what I mentioned, this $300 billion of spend a year going into the cloud. So if venture investors, as our venture investors have done, they've made a bet on cloud and the movement to the cloud, and they feel pretty confident in that. So they just look at that $300 billion coming in this category, and the revenues are going to support good-sized companies, even if they don't get to be as big as Microsoft. And the third thing, it's like, you know, when you go to a casino, the deck is always stacked against you, right? The casino's always going to win. The third thing is that these big companies, these legacy incumbents, Microsoft and Cisco and Oracle, have huge balance sheets. They have billions and billions of dollars on their balance sheet. And the worst case scenario these venture folks think about is their companies will just get bought, you know, for a few $1 billion. That's like the low scenario. So I think they're going to be fine.
Yeah. Okay. JP, anything you'd like to add there?
I prefer to think that if you're creating value because you're using a completely different set of, you know, as Andrew was referring to, the terms we use within what we may call a platform have changed. And I'm much more interested in how value is being created by the new models of platform. The growth that comes from that value, the size of the market you can go after is still large enough. It's not translating yesterday's market into tomorrow's market just piece for piece. The nature of what you do is different when you say, we don't have a desktop anymore in terms of how people consume or get access to devices. The mobile market is fundamentally different, right? Designing for it, moving from UI to UX, understanding that partnering is, you know, all of us have one thing in common within whatever we want to call ourselves, which is a set of principles that try to future-proof what you do. And doing that means protecting the customer investment. And we've got smarter at it because, you know, it's the people, the learning, the technology has all evolved. So what we may see today as a service-oriented world is, you know, leaps and bounds better than what we'd have seen 20 years ago. And that learning is creating new value, right? And I'm fascinated not by constant translation of the old value, but what is being generated truly as new. So when I talk about ecosystems, when I talk about partnering, when I talk about platforms, it's seeing what people do today that couldn't have been done yesterday and is solving a class of problem that people couldn't attack. Okay, that unlocks value that was trapped earlier. So when people want to talk about, you know, being able to build organizations, I'm as interested in what's being enfranchised for the first time, what's being attacked for the first time, what's been given value for the first time. So just the sheer transfer of something like mobile has created a different marketplace for the enterprise, even though 10 years ago everyone was saying there's no way it's going to enter the enterprise.
Yeah. It's interesting to talk about the, mobile where this is concerned. Is Uber a David or a Goliath? They just raised 1.2 billion, valuation about 17 billion. This is an app company. They're built on a platform. There's probably about 20 such companies that are billion-dollar companies that have been built on the mobile platform. WhatsApp being another famous one, Instagram, there's about 20 of them. It's interesting to talk about the mobile platform where the enterprise is concerned because nearly all of those, as far as I can think, are B2C companies serving consumers. Yeah. So a lot of the value where mobile is concerned is going to consumers, and still enterprise is sort of slightly lagging behind. It's kind of mirroring what happened in the web, where innovations in the early days in the web benefited consumers first. Web 2.0, user-generated content, a lot of those benefits went to MySpace and kind of normal consumers first, and then Salesforce, etc., came along. Mark talking about, I want it to be as easy as buying a book on Amazon. I want using business software to be as easy as that. It's going to be interesting to see how some of the innovations we've seen in mobile tech get adopted. I mean, I can't wait. As I'm a B2B guy. This company is an enterprise company. I want to be able to use some of these innovations in mobile in my business, rather than always having to break out the desktop.
Well, I think, if you take an example like Uber, it sort of is a good way of explaining where I was trying to go, which is that when it came out, people were saying this is going to be a substitution effect for existing rides, whereas all the learning we're seeing is actually new rides are being formed, rather than the competition is for the historical taxi cab in the historical structure. Sort of saying, well, if you have a pricing-sensitive algorithm, then the problem of a lack of supply when demand is high could be solved. So now the number of rides taking place is an order of magnitude different because something has been unlocked.
Yeah.
Okay? So it's that kind of mindset to say, well, we couldn't solve the supply side before, now we have a mechanism to. Okay? So whether you take us, whether you take Okta, whether you take the Importio, the premise that we're operating towards, and we could all be Goliaths within our set, and David's in conjunction with somebody else, is what are you creating value from or helping the customer create value from that couldn't be done before? And if that's new value, who cares about the traditional structure? Because the value comes from the brand new.
Okay, so really, the whole premise of this entire panel, the whole David versus Goliath conceit, can be completely swept away. We're in a post-David versus Goliath world.
I mean, I'd be interested to hear what the guys would say. It's not a zero-sum game, basically. I mean, companies compete, but you as a company compare about your competitors, whether they're tiny or big, regardless. It's not about the size of company that's the kind of the competitive axis is along.
I think it's the new cloud companies versus the old Goliaths of Oracle and Microsoft, and I think and SAP, and I think that either those companies the old companies are gonna figure out cloud and buy and beg, steal, and borrow their way into this new world, or they're gonna falter and the new generation is gonna rise up and be the next wave of Goliaths.
I think, even if they continue to be Davids and Goliaths, the change is that the slingshot's in the hands of the customer, not the company. Okay? That's where the power is shifted.
Okay. Well, I think it's time to put that long, extended biblical allegory to bed there, and thank the panel. Thank you very much to Todd, to JP, and to Andrew. Thank you very much. And JP, you're going to be staying on stage, and so please thank them all. And JP will be staying with you to talk about platforms in the enterprise.
Thank you.